Do you think UFOs, the paranormal, weird history, cryptozoology, and outsider art are pretty darn cool? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to High Strangeness with your host, Steve Berg.
The video version. Well, my friends, welcome back to another episode of High Strangeness. Whoa, that was the longest I ever carried it out. Tonight, well, I'll say today, because I'm not going to lie to you guys, it's 11:18 Central Time, 12:18 Eastern Time, and that means when it's Eastern Time, it's Rob Kristoffersen time, folks. Back for a third appearance, the first three-timer ever in High Strange history.
Holy hell.
Rob, how are you doing?
Is this what it feels like for those SNL people to be like the Five Timers Club, you know?
Yes,
and like,
yes.
like,
well, yeah, you're the one who puts like the medal on people when they come back for a third time since you're the first.
Hell yeah.
It's a big burden on your shoulders, but I know you can take it.
Oh yeah. We can handle this stuff. We're fine.
We can. Rob, how have you been, buddy?
You know, life is an endless sea of horrors, but we persist. We get through.
Yeah, Rob and I were commiserating on the state of planet Earth and just some of our fears and you know what I'm talking about, folks. You know what I'm talking about. But we are here to brighten everyone's mood because Rob so graciously has offered his time to come tell us about some very exciting, kind of rare, deep-cut humanoid cases. Rob, folks, just to remind you, is, in my opinion, the greatest humanoid historian we have ever known. And this is a very special treat. He knows where the bodies are buried. He knows all the dirt. He knows all the scuttlebutt, all the rumors about these humanoids. Rob, so I'm going to hand over the floor to you, my friend.
Yeah. I looked for the weirdest of the weird. I went for, I believe I told you, like, the most unusual humanoids that I could find. Mm-hmm. And I think we hit pay dirt with some of these because they don't resemble, like, these are the humanoids that don't really have a lot of humanoidish qualities.
Right.
But they're just so damn weird.
Good.
The first case that I have, this is a Jerome Clark special that I found it a long time ago, flipping through Flying Saucer Review. Jerome Clark, who recently published the 4th edition of the UFO Encyclopedia. It just came out last month.
I just got mine yesterday.
Nice.
Gorgeous. It's so gorgeous.
It is. It's such an endless, like, there's so many great cases in there to like read through, review, like a lot of sources cited. So if anybody's ever like wanting to dive into this kind of topic, it's like it's a perfect way to do it.
And let me tell you, like in the UFO world, like citing sources is rare. That's always my big gripe with Keel, is that there's these great stories and then you can't follow up. But Jerome Clark is diligent about that, you know, like, and I love that about him.
Yeah, no, he is. And we will be talking about Mr. Keel in our last case because I have a few bones to pick with him about a case that I recently wrote about. But this is the case of the Utah snowman. And yeah, it's a snowman.
Hell yes.
So, yeah, this case was first reported by Jerome Clark in Flying Saucer Review, and it happened to two of his friends, a guy named Wendell Meyer and Nancy Jensen. And Nancy's son, Aaron, from a previous marriage of hers, was also a part of this. And Clark describes them as, quote, pleasant young people whose lifestyle would cause some to label them as hippies, whatever that much abused expression means.
That's great. They mean they like drugs.
Yeah.
They like drugs.
Yeah, basically. They were slightly interested in the occult, but had no interest in UFOs whatsoever. So this case, we're getting a snowman case in June. Okay, 1969. So Wendell, Nancy, and Aaron, they're traveling from Moorhead, Minnesota, where they live, going on a vacation trip to California. And they traveled throughout the day, passing through the Dakota Badlands, Yellowstone National Park, made
Beautiful.
it all the way to Salt Lake City, Utah by midnight. And southwest of the city, sometime between midnight and 1 a.m., and this is the way that Jerome just drops us in here. Wendell, quote unquote, regained consciousness. Wendell's behind the wheel. So, yeah, I know what you're thinking there. That's a really bonkers place to drop us in. But Wendell stated, quote, all of a sudden, it was like I woke up. I saw a white post in front of me and I couldn't turn the steering wheel. So I plowed right into it and knocked 4 over in all. At 90 miles per hour, there should have been more damage.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Okay.
Yeah. So odd that nobody else in the car said anything. Nobody tried to wake him up.
Right.
You're going 90 miles per hour. You know you're going 90 miles per hour. There's but yeah, there's no real damage to the car other than he's got a flat tire. He did break the shock absorber though. So that happens. The bumper barely had a dent in it and their turn signals were kind of messed up. But other than that, they were fine. So Wendell changes the tire and they move on. So he flees the scene of his own accident. And they just take off down the road. Nancy offers to drive at this point. And a short distance into their trip, she starts to feel very uncomfortable is the term that she uses. It's the type of paranoia that sets in with UFO witnesses that are on the road, and they just feel like there's something following us. So in the rearview mirror, it becomes flooded with yellow and white light. She's not concerned about it right away, but then this light moves up the opposite side of the highway, heading in a direction that there's no road there. It's just it would technically be going the wrong direction if it was. So there's this odd light that's following, and this light makes an abrupt left-hand turn onto a road that doesn't exist. And it just goes. So they continued through the salt flats and the mountains, and the lights appear again coming over the mountains. And it starts closing the distance behind them, moving a little faster than they are. Quote, that is when we started getting paranoid, said Nancy. When it got close, there was like the sound that permeated that they described like an electronic whale in a flying saucer movie. So you can kind of get it into your head, like the weird sounds that flying saucers have made in movies since the 1950s. And it got so close that it nearly blinded them, and they stated that they could feel this vibration in their bodies from this light. So Nancy's son Aaron starts to cry at that moment, and in response, the car window, the back car window right next to him, opened slightly in the back and then closed, and then he just stopped crying.
Weird. And I got to think this is before power windows too. So there was manually manipulating the, wow, interesting.
Yes. Yeah. Now Nancy, should have been like the way that the narrative kind of breaks down in the story is kind of weird because, she was the one that had been driving. I don't know if they'd switched at some point, but according to the narrative, Wendell was now driving and he stepped on the gas to find the vehicle slowing down. Oh Christ, he called out in response, it's going to get us. And in response, the UFO just kind of drifted back away from the car. So, seems interesting, UFO. Maybe it's listening, maybe it can hear. So he pulls the car into a rest stop, and the way that it's turned, the headlights are hitting the highway. And the object stopped too, and it hovered on the other side of the highway from where they were. And it was then that the family noticed that there was a camper at the rest stop. The lights were on inside, and Nancy suggested to Wendell that he go over there and tell them about the UFO. But, like a normal, sane person, he said, hell no, I ain't doing that.
Smart. Good call. Good call.
Yeah. You know, the strangeness continues, though, because shortly after his refusal, the pair described seeing a quote-unquote ghostly face peering out at them from the camper.
Oh my God.
And these kind of faces would be pretty common throughout the story. So Wendell's attention is drawn across the divided highway again, and he's looking over at this huge, hulking figure, quote, that resembled a big snowman with round head and body, and it was moving towards them slowly. So this figure has no face, and their legs and arms were like large and roundish, but it didn't have knee joints, so it was moving very stiffly and very slowly. For some reason, they decided to turn their car's headlights on, and for some reason, it made the creature go away. It disappeared. And they thought at first it must have been a sign that they had seen. Like,
Right.
Just try to rationalize this away. And when they turned them on again, the snowman turned them. They turned them off, and then when they turned them back on again, the snowman was half the distance closer to them now. Just reappeared closer to them. And that's when they all piled in and decided to squeal the tires and get the hell out of there.
Yeah.
So they caught up to some traffic, but that didn't seem to deter the UFO because it caught up to them. And it wasn't until daylight started to approach that the UFO just kind of fell further and further behind until it disappeared. They pulled off to the road, grab a few hours of sleep, and then they resumed their trip. About an hour down the road, they spot the camper that looked similar to the one that they had seen at the rest stop, and they assumed it was. Nancy looked over and she exclaimed, "Wendell, those people don't have any heads."
Whoa.
Yeah. So he wasn't able to see it themselves, but what she saw from these windows is a bunch of headless people on board. And Wendell didn't get to see it because they were rounding a curve, but he figured once they got around that curve, he'd slow down and they would pass. No, camper never reappeared. It disappeared. There was no place for it to turn off. It just disappeared. And that was like the last strange thing to happen on the trip itself, but this phenomenon would follow them home. Yeah, it's gonna get a little creepier.
Oh my God.
So there's one night, about a month later, this is 15 miles outside of Moorhead, Minnesota. Wendell's car breaks down. He gets under the hood to see what was wrong, and he notices this kind of group of red, green, and blue lights in the sky.
Yeah.
And the lights kind of just like turn and come around behind his vehicle, and they move closer and closer until they just disappear. And this is a great quote here. To quote Clark's write-up, since then, Wendell and Nancy have been haunted by a hooded man without facial features. When Wendell first saw it, it lunged at him and disappeared. Nancy was scrubbing the bathroom floor one day when she got a trembling feeling. Turning around, she glimpsed a hooded figure, faceless figure, a little bit more than an outline, but nothing distinct, that jumped at her.
What?
So this got into their home.
This is awful.
Yeah, it's the worst.
Sorry to laugh at their trauma, but
I mean, we're all laughing at trauma right now, Steve.
Right.
It's what we're doing.
it's
what we're
Schadenfreude is the only form of comedy left, right?
Yeah, basically. Exactly. So Wendell would suffer from paranoia surrounding fears that he was just being followed everywhere. And there was one incident during a lunch break at work when he claimed to see a figure walking by him. Quote, at home, each new time he saw it, the entity had grown larger.
Oh, God.
Yeah. One time when he was driving home, he kind of had that familiar feeling, and he looked back to kind of catch this glint of light. He wasn't sure where it was coming from, but there was some kind of light in his backseat. Quote, the next February, while resting in a hospital from a minor ailment, Wendell suffered from recurring thoughts of someone, quote, cold and lifeless, like a part of me, like a premonition, end quote. At the side of his bed, appeared a form without distinct facial features. I could have seen the face if I had wanted to. It was a man with long, thin fingers. I could tell it was trying to communicate with me, but I wouldn't let it. It kept coming back, though I couldn't shut it off. So we're talking about Slender Man here. This is Slender Man.
I was just thinking the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Slender Man long before the Slender Man legend. Wendell concluded, for a long time, as I felt as if I were fighting evil forces inside me, but I'm cleansed now.
I'm cleansed now.
Yeah.
Wait,
Yep.
How is he cleansed? Did he say how?
Steve, we're talking about articles about UFOs. You know you're not going to get the answers you want.
I want this. I mean, like, look, in case I need to be cleansed, I might have some helpful tips from Wendell.
We need to find this guy. We need to find Wendell. We need to ask, how did you cleanse yourself, sir?
Yeah.
Because we need a mass cleansing right the fuck now.
Don't we ever?
Yeah. Jerome Clark compared these faceless figures, and I can kind of see it, to the Solway Firth spaceman.
Uh-huh.
I get it, mysterious, kind of like that photo is mysterious in and of itself because the figure in it does not look like it's facing towards the camera. It looks like it's facing, like if we're looking at his back.
Yeah.
And it's just it's an interesting observation.
It is.
But so Clark has some curious observations about the technological guise of UFOs, and I think it's an interesting way to conclude this particular encounter. Quote, perhaps it is because the whole idea of the UFO is basically a technological one, and part of the ethic of the young is, to some considerable degree, a rejection of technology. Just as in the past, the ultra-terrestrials, to borrow John Keel's phrase, have appeared to us in forms most suited to the temperament of the times, everything from angels to airships to spaceships. Now they are assuming new forms for new times. Could it be, God forbid, that in the years ahead, as the human race alters its perception of the universe, the UFO will be phased pretty much out of existence? I, for one, would not be much surprised. It may well be that in the future we shall see in the influx into our time-space continuum of phenomenon even stranger, even weirder, even more mysterious than unidentified flying objects. Mr. Clark is wrong. Okay. We rely on technology more and more. We have not rejected technology. We've embraced it more and more.
Yeah.
But here's a thought. What if the phenomenon has changed, but it's become more mundane? It's not weirder. It's just very mundane. It's so mundane that you may not even notice it these days.
Yeah.
So,
that's an interesting point because even if you think about like flying airship wave, just taking a timeline for example, it does seem like if you just think about the shapes of UFOs and the encounter stories, they are getting less weird.
Yeah, they're like common shapes that you expect. Like like triangles are not far off from like what the military uses with some of its planes. Some of it have that kind of like hostile architecture to it, the B-2 and stuff. So it's not far off to think that, but again, it depends on how you view this phenomenon. If you view this phenomenon as extraterrestrials, as like ultra terrestrials, all that stuff, there honestly shouldn't be change at all. Like,
Right.
if you're talking about like the extraterrestrial hypothesis, there really shouldn't be any change over time,
Yeah.
all that much. Like they're not going to change their craft to suit our needs,
Right.
which is what most people who theorize on this stuff believe, is that this phenomenon changes over time, and
like getting an upgrade, upgrading their car. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But to me, I think, the fact that people aren't seeing UFOs as much, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's just a change. And it's a change to something that maybe we just don't recognize. Or if we do, we only recognize it in the moments when it happens. And again, it's so mundane. It's weird. And maybe you'll talk to your friend about this weird moment where this weird thing happened. There is a weird kind of perception thing that happens when these moments happen, in that you're experiencing reality as normally, like we are right now. And then it's just this tiny moment that makes you realize that there are things beyond the reality that you're in.
Yeah.
So, regardless of what that may be, I think most of the time it's kind of confined itself to small, harmless things.
Right.
Whether it's like, it almost has the same feeling of like deja vu these days.
Yeah.
In that you recognize something, but you're not sure exactly what.
Right.
It's just like kind of this anomaly in your average day to day. And like, I think that's what the phenomenon has become. And I don't think, and that's not to say that like, people aren't having UFO sightings and stuff like that. I think it's just taken on an entirely new look. I think it just comes down to what the phenomenon needs to suit itself for. For our benefit, because I do think that these sightings are, in most cases, for our benefit. Not in all these stories,
right?
But like, a fair amount of them. And there's a quote that I will read later that kind of addresses that from a different investigator, a more controversial investigator, shall we say? But this was before he became controversial. But like, that to me is the next stage in evolution. It's not how much more absurd do you need us to become versus lighter impact on your day, but still an impact enough to where whatever it is that they're needing to do, whatever it is they're staging for our benefit, they can do it without causing disruption.
Right. Not they're kind of like, sucking out some of the drama out of these encounters, maybe. One interesting thing, Rob, in the last year, I have been obsessed with roads as a motif. And I mean, like, look, I think a lot about roads, which is weird. You see ladies in white, Bigfoot crossings, so many UFO landings in the middle of roads, like you can't even count. But you sometimes wonder, like, and people, this is not my idea, people have talked about how, when you're driving at night, long stretches, driving with the yellow lines and stuff like that, that can be kind of hypnotic.
Yeah.
And then if you add into like that kind of almost like, rhythmic bumping sound that roads make, like dun 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 dun, it's almost like that's like a binaural beat in a way. So I sometimes wonder if like roads put people in a hypnotic state to be able to experience this stuff. Now that is, I have no evidence of that. That's just my own wackadoo idea.
That is a theory that's out there. It's called highway hypnosis. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And it kind of reflects the fact that like a lot of weird things do happen to people on when they're out driving and
Right.
stuff. For sure. Like um, one of the sticking points of like 80s ufology is that the abduction was something that occurred on the road, and then it
Mm-hmm.
turned into something that occurred in your bedroom and stuff.
Yes.
So like
Yeah.
the face of it changed a lot, which you know
Did the
uh
bedroom stuff that kind of started happening in the early '80s, right? Because like I feel like in the '60s and '70s, when I'm reading about contactee experiences or encounters, it's rarely in the bedroom. It seems like
right.
you're right. It's out in rural areas, out in the road. They're driving, from a radio station where they work back home, and then a rocket ship lands and little beer cans come out.
Right,
you
yeah.
know?
Like kind of like home encounters weren't, they were rare, but like they happen. Like
Yeah.
there was a British contactee, Cynthia Appleton, who claimed that there was a man that appeared in her home one day who the way in which he appeared was like an old school tube TV turning on, like the picture got, more
Mm-hmm.
clearer and clearer as
Mm-hmm.
it was able to warm up. But more often than not, people were having these encounters like outside.
Yeah.
It was a rarity for them to just like see somebody in their home or
Right.
something
Right.
like that. But like,
Yeah.
yeah, like highway hypnosis is totally a thing, and it makes
Yeah.
sense.
It's very interesting. And like these highway, even like before cars, like if you read about fairy faith and stuff like that, and other kind of like a lot of this stuff happens on roads when people were traveling, by
Hmm.
carriage and stuff like that. They'd see a fae. You know what I'm getting at, but like I do find it interesting as a motif, roads, and it does seem like there was this thing with the contactees in the '60s and '70s where they were leaving their house to experience it, and then
Hmm.
in the '80s during the Reagan administration, it was coming to your house. You didn't have
Yeah,
to go
yeah.
anywhere. It was more convenient. Just stay at home, and you'll be visited by an alien.
That also lends credence to the idea of this being about kind of the human journey of things,
Mm-hmm.
and like this idea that maybe you will encounter something on the road that
Right.
will put you on a path,
Yeah.
send you on a journey,
Yeah.
something like that. Like
Yeah.
like the road is very symbolic when it comes to these kind of things, because that's that's what I'm going to take away from it. That's
Yeah.
what you know anybody who wants to take that away from it, they can.
Yep.
It's just there's a lot of symbolism there that I don't think gets explored, because
Right.
like when it comes to these encounters, I mean, there are those that thought about them on more deeper philosophical roots, and I encourage people to do that. I encourage people to seek out writings other than it's just like your weird UFO stuff. There's like weird like books about all sorts of things that I think,
Right.
kind of help lend credence to things. Uh there's a great book called uh it's called The Species of Spaces by Georges Perec. He was a French writer. His parents, I believe, they died in Auschwitz, but he was this French writer, and he had a lot of interesting perspectives on things. And like Species of Spaces is like I think a good text if you want to kind of see how like the weird can integrate into our world. It's not what
Right.
he was getting at, but like you can draw from that.
Uh-huh.
I've been kind of looking at alternative like texts and stuff.
Yeah.
Like again, like magical realism is a great portal to this kind of stuff, because magical realism is all about like these tiny like these magical moments within kind of life that make it interesting, make it more fun and stuff like that. So like I'll just make a bunch of recommendations here. If you want like good examples of that, The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov, 100 Years of Solitude, by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. The short stories of Kelly Link are fantastic for this. What else? The short stories of George Saunders, I think, really, if you like, specifically the story Civil War Land in Bad Decline, is such a great story that kind of throws you into the absurdity that I think is adjacent to the absurdity of these kind of encounters. Like George is really good at capturing the absurdity of everyday life,
Right.
or like like mostly everyday life, but of like even in like almost dystopian ways at times and such. But like his stories are really good. There's a great book called Trickster Makes This World.
I've never heard
It's
of
by
that.
it's by a guy named Lewis Hyde, and it is all about like the trickster myth and how it influences creativity and stuff. Great book to read.
I mean, you can make an argument that we live in trickster times right now.
We do.
Like, I mean, like, if there was ever an era in my lifetime, I would say this is the trickster era right now. Like,
basically,
not in a great way, but like,
yeah,
it's it feels very trickstery out there right now. Not just in the UFO world, but like in general.
It does. And again, like when it comes to the UFO phenomenon and the time period in which it emerged, if you think of it emerging in the troubled times that we were in, in the middle of the Cold War, you have a cultural revolution happening in the 60s, 70s, man, holy fuck. The 70s were a pretty goddamn dark time in the United States.
Absolutely.
So, like, if you look at it through that lens, it's easy to see why these things were appearing. It's just, what is the cause? And then again, I don't think the cause is some like extraterrestrials. I don't think the cause is some ultra terrestrials, because again, if you're talking about things that have human motivations to them, which I do believe this phenomenon has motivations for us in whichever form it takes, it does not make sense that there are aliens coming here to benefit us. It does not make sense that there are ultra terrestrials that are benefiting us. If we, that's if you truly believe that this phenomenon does benefit us, and I think it does. I think that the more that you explore beyond the topic, because I don't think the phenomenon ever wanted us to become obsessed with it. I don't think that's really something that you can escape either, but I think it's also something that you're meant to integrate into your life, and to make it a more like wholesome life, a more meaningful life. I think that's what it's there for. But
it's like meditation. It's just it's a way to go deeper into yourself and the world around you. Like like I think I mean, like, I know we've talked about this before, but like when you get into UFOs at first, obviously you obsess about reading UFO books. But then, like you just mentioned, you start reading other texts that have nothing to do with UFOs, but you can put a UFO lens on it, and you can gain a deeper meaning about UFOs through these books. So and which that's, I think that's great. That's one of the great benefits about being into high strangeness and weird stuff, is that, like, if you get really into it, then you are get so obsessed with the mystery that as a result you end up culturing yourself.
Basically, yeah. I mean, I think the phenomenon invites you to cast a wider net, a more like it kind of forces you to look at all aspects of it from multiple different lenses, culturally, socially, even physically. Like it diversifies your life in ways that you don't realize that it does.
I completely agree. And I go back to, I know, I'm not saying I wholeheartedly like believe or stand by Valet's control system hypothesis,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think there's something to the idea of UFOs or a cultural thermostat.
Yeah.
You know how he says that? That's kind of what we're talking about a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Like it really is. Like it is going to somehow mirror the culture that is currently going on. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I think that idea is fascinating, and I just think about it a lot.
I think it uses culture to get across its message, more so than anything. It is always going to reflect the culture in many ways. I just think that also at other times it goes beyond the culture in and of itself to kind of show you something more.
Yeah.
And in this belief that it's not even a belief that I fully adopt, but it's a belief that I think, or at least an idea that I think is valid, is like if the phenomenon decides to take a step back and just kind of like limit itself, to me that says that the phenomenon does not want to be perceived necessarily in the way that we perceive it.
Right.
It's not wanting us to like we're always going to be obsessed with this stuff, but I don't think this phenomenon wants us to become obsessed with it. I think it is a tool that gets used when it is needed. So
Ooh, it's fun to pick apart these motifs, man. I could do this for hours. Rob, do you have another humanoid case for us?
Oh, I do.
Oh,
have fun with that, you heady freaks. I hope you enjoyed that.
That one was for the stoners out there.
yeah. Have fun. I hope you're high when you're listening to this. I really do.
I'm sure they are. They are.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I'll be honest. I am a sucker for bong hit dorm room talk. So like this is wonderful. All right, well, lay another one on us if you would.
Oh yeah. So this is a French case from 1974. This is Monday, August 26, 1974. It was apparently a holiday in France, and this encounter centers around the Marais family. The Marais' daughter, like, we don't get first names. It's Mr. and Mrs. Marais and their daughter. So, anonymity to an extent. The daughter had gone out to like this kind of the main square to see these like attractions, take part in games and stuff like that. She said she was going to be back by 8:30, and when she hadn't returned by 8:55, her father stepped outside the front door, just kind of waiting there. And at around 9, this dark object comes into view. Now, whatever it was darker than the sky. The sky was like gray at this time. I mean, the sun pretty much set, or at least it was like, going down, probably almost fully down. But it was black, and it had this white corona around it. So it kind of looked like an eclipsed sun, if you were looking up at it. And it starts descending closer as it was drawing closer to him. The object was estimated to be about 26 feet in diameter. So the man briefly runs inside to grab his wife, and she joins him. And the two watch this object, and it comes to a stop about 65 feet above the ground. And it splits in two vertically. Whoa. So you've got basically two halves. And they split apart. They're kind of just hovering there for a second. Each of them has its own corona to it. So each of them has this glow that kind of encompasses it. So like each half has one. And the right half moves off in a southeasterly direction, while the other one just stays there. It's just hovering there. And toward that straighter edge on it, there's this kind of veil that drops down. It's just like it looked like a white line, basically. And these two figures pop out of the side of it. And, one appears and then the other comes into view. They were described as being humanoid in shape, approximately 5 feet tall. And Mr. Murray referred to them as quote-unquote cosmonauts.
Okay.
They're decked head to toe in this whitish gray metallic kind of material, and they're wearing helmets.
I love when they have outfits, by the way. Like, my favorite thing is I love UFO clothes or alien clothes.
UFO fashion, man.
It is.
I mean,
someone needs to write a book about that.
I remember seeing an article once, a jokey article about UFO fashion, and it was really great. I got to see if I can find that at some point. But like UFO fashion is onesies, suits that cover the entire body.
Yeah. Sometimes even the head. Yeah. I mean, sometimes the whole thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Flowing robes, into flowing robes.
Hooded, kind of hooded things. Yeah. I mean, it's diverse.
Yeah. It is diverse. So, according to researchers, quote, they move to and fro with a rolling gait, rather like marionettes. They change places going from one side to the other as though on a flat surface, their arms and legs waving about in kind of a mechanical fashion.
Oh, my God.
So the two eyewitnesses watched this thing for an hour until they realized that their daughter still hasn't come home. And there's no traffic, no sound, there's nothing. It's just like a complete void out here. And they didn't hear anything when these humanoids were doing this. It was like peaceful. They described it as being like very peaceful to watch. So Mrs. Morey, she goes back indoors and just sets the table for dinner. And then the father goes and gets in his car to go find his daughter. They get in an argument on the way back. If the UFO is there, they're not paying attention to it. He did not recall seeing it when he came back. But I find it interesting in this case that the UFO is almost showing up in response to this man being concerned that his daughter has not come home. So it's like, the UFO's here. Don't worry about it. Let her have her fun and such. Just watch the show. It's fine.
Yeah.
Everything's good until he kind of just finally gets to the point where it's like, okay, she's still not home. I gotta go get her.
Yeah.
But like, it's always interesting the way that they write about these incidents because they're almost always in response to something. There's almost always something going on that requires, I don't know if it requires anything, but like it's almost in response to what the person is doing, what the person is concerned about, what's going on in this person's life, and then boom, UFO. It's right there.
Right. Well, I mean, you can even think about the last case, the first case. I mean, he hits a white pole and then he sees like a snowman. Even though it didn't look exactly like it, it's like almost foreshadowing. Like, like that is really interesting. So he went out to find the daughter. He does find the daughter.
He does. Brings her back.
Pretty easily. Okay, brings her back. That is I love that the mother's instinct was, well, all right, well, let's just go on as dinner as usual, set the table. Like, you'd almost think it would be one of those nights where, like, no, this is a grab and go buffet style, sit on the couch in front of the TV. Like, we're going to forego formality tonight since we saw, humanoids dance around a UFO. But no, she's, keeping to a routine.
And then again, that just like gets into the fact that this is like a random moment in life.
Yeah.
It's slightly weirder. It's still there. It still happened. But it's like, go on with life as usual. Like, how do you it's hard to explain to people how, if you have these kind of encounters, it's not something that you necessarily become obsessed with. It's
Right,
not
right.
something that it may come across your mind later, but
Yeah,
it's like you've got other things to do.
yeah.
Like I don't, this phenomenon isn't meant to be like incredibly disruptive to your life. It's just kind of a moment. It's almost like an edit where you can tell that something was like drastically either removed or added
Uh-huh.
into something, and it's very noticeable. Like in certain films that have been cut down, like there's a scene where an actor comes into a scene and they're looking all distraught, and you have no idea why they're looking distraught because
Right,
what they had done was edited out the reason why they were distraught in the
right.
first place. Like there's a moment in
It's like
one of
a
my
jump
all
cut,
time
yeah.
one of my all time favorite movies is called The Gamer's Hands of Fate, and there's a moment where you see this one character at the beginning of the scene, and he's all happy going through this convention, and stuff, and he's looking at everything, and when you cut back to him, he's worried, and you don't really
Mhm.
know why he's worried.
Right.
You kind of have an idea, but it's not made abundantly clear why he's like all distraught and stuff like that. So
Interesting.
yeah,
Well, it
I
makes me this kind of makes me think too of like all the testimonies from contactees where, like, I always think of the Mike Cleland example where he's in his bedroom, he sees a light coming out of his window, he stands up, looks through
yeah,
his window and sees 3 gray aliens standing in front of a
approaching
white
his
light,
house, and then he
approaching his
decides to go.
house.
Yeah,
And
and then
then
he
he gets
decides
them,
to go to sleep.
and then he's like, "Well, I guess I'll just go back to sleep."
Yeah,
But like I love that, and he really has examined that, because he's like, it wasn't like I wasn't like in shock, or he's like, I was grasping what I was saying, but the only thing I felt like I needed to do was just go back to sleep.
yeah.
And I've heard that
Um,
from, I've actually talked to people who have experienced, like, not necessarily like gray aliens, but like seen something in the room, a shadow person, or had some kind of paranormal thing, and then they just go, I'm gonna go, and I go back to sleep. Maybe it's like a way to fight it off, saying like this is a dream, if I just go back. But like I find that very fascinating too.
yeah, it is like if you look at it as almost living symbology in a way.
Yeah.
Like if you compare that to say someone who sees angel numbers or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
it's not dissimilar. It's just it's a very different version of it, but it
Mm-hmm.
is very similar in the way that a person reacts to it when they're looking at it or stuff like that. It's definitely like it's like living symbology
Yeah.
in many ways. So like there's a great book that kind of like delves into this uh it's called what the hell is it called? Visual intelligence, I think.
Mm-hmm.
um I have it downstairs. I think that's what it's called.
Visual intelligence. Okay.
Visual intelligence. But it's all about yeah, visual intelligence, how we create what we see. It is
Interesting.
by Donald D. Hoffman. It's like all about like how we kind of create the world that we see and stuff through like visual equivalences, like
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a logo or whether it is a sign or something like that.
Right.
It's kind of like visually, how do we create our world?
Mm-hmm.
And that's an interesting book to dive into. If that's kind of like another piece of this, because there is that like kind of like living kind of language, living symbology that this stuff does represent, that does seem to connect with a lot of people on a subconscious level, So
Well put. I love that. I've never heard anyone described as living symbology, and I think that is, well, this is gonna be the new thing I'm gonna obsess about in 2025. Living symbology. I think that's that's a great way of putting it, though. I've never heard it put that way. I'm like, kind of blown away. I love that. I'm writing that down right now. Living symbology.
there's like an Instagram account of and you can see this, like I don't think it's like one specifically, but like it's almost like you're seeing a sign, but on this Instagram account and these images that I've seen, it's like text, but it's like almost like it's lasers, like laser, like neon lights, just like neon words hovering over whatever backdrop that it's on. And it kind of feels like that's like what we're talking about is like
Right.
here's your signpost. Here is something that maybe you need to relate to, something that is going to be significant for you, something that has meaning. So it manifests itself in ways that are important. So like maybe it these encounters that happen in that way, and like the way in which people react, maybe it wasn't meant to be a big deal, but it was meant to evoke something. Like at the end of the day, it's a message no matter what.
Right.
Regardless of like we think of the aliens delivering us a message, but we don't see them as the message themselves.
Right.
We just see them as like the messenger, not the message.
Absolutely.
And I think in most cases, like they are the entire. It's the entire message. The whole encounter is a message itself.
I love that. Well put. Damn. Mic drop. I will insert a mic drop sound effect right there.
Yeah, just throw it in there.
Yeah. I love that, though. I now am obsessed with the concept of living symbology. I think that is fucking awesome.
Yeah, man.
Bravo.
I mean, if anything, look, folks, I'm here to stimulate your brains. I'm here to like, I'm the antidote to those "Is your brain on drugs" commercials from back in the 90s, where you're seeing a frying egg in a pan, and I'm like, I'm gonna be honest, folks. I fry eggs every day, and I don't think at all about drugs when I look at them.
How to Fry Eggs Without Drugs by Rob Kristoffersen. I mean, that's amazing. And also, like, I will say this: the one thing when you listen to Rob, he's going to throw so many amazing books at you that you will, as a result, probably go broke. So blame Rob for your financial troubles, because I've already written down like 5 or 6 books that I'm absolutely going to have to buy now.
I mean,
thanks, Rob.
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to make people poorer. That's what I'm here for. Like I fuck, like Amazon or book outlets need to fucking cut me in, because like I'm giving them so much goddamn business. Like
you are.
Yeah.
Well, that was the thing when I first started listening to your phenomenal podcast, Our Strange Skies. That is where I started ordering all these books I had never heard of or thought about, and I was like, "Damn, this guy! I love this podcast, but he is making me poor."
I mean, that's kind of the mark of any good podcast, if they can make you poorer without actually you giving them the money. Right. It is like a level of genius that ultimately does not pay off for the podcaster in any way.
No.
But it's like, what is a podcast if not an hour and 30 minutes of book recommendations? That's what I'm here for. Or a book podcast. That's what this is now.
That's essentially so true. It's so true.
Yeah.
Oh man, can you might lay another one on us, Maestro?
Yeah. How would you like some jelly-like entities?
Yes, please, and thank you.
So the investigator of this case in particular was Andrew Collins. If you have seen that show on the History Channel, they call it Ancient Aliens. You will have seen Andrew Collins on there many times,
aka Joey Crop Circle. I'm going to call him.
Yes. I think the best thing that man was ever involved in was psychic questing.
Yes. And you know what? I actually love the psychic questing stuff.
Yeah.
We should do an episode on that sometime. Yeah. That's not an easy thing to explain, but like they had some, if you were to believe what he was saying, the results were quite amazing.
Yeah, the results were interesting. There was I did a portion on psychic questing on an episode that I did way back, about this girl who, she lived in Wales, I believe, and she had a series of weird encounters, but the main encounter, like you've seen me share that piece of artwork of that little girl like laying in a field looking through a bush at a UFO, and there's like a dude, an alien, his eyes are huge, and he looks like he's got like a metal detector. It's that story, but it was, I actually have the book that Jenny Randall's co-wrote. I think it was with Paul Wetnell. It's a hard book to find, but it was full of the psychic questing stuff, because she kind of
Oh,
entered the story at the beginning of the psychic questing stuff, and it is such a bonkers kind of like, because it's like Jenny Randall's like, she doesn't care, like she is skeptical, but she also believes in a fair amount of the
right,
stuff. She's
right.
a great mixture of both.
Yeah,
And
I think, I mean, I'm a big fan of Randall's. Like, some people
Mhm.
don't really like get her books, but I think she is one of the most valuable researchers
Yes.
ever. Like,
Yeah.
really, like a top five, to be honest. Like, for me,
Oh, yeah, no, like definitely deserves to be on that Mount Rushmore somewhere
yeah.
of, researchers. Like if Mount Rushmore had 5 heads on them, I think you could put Hynek, Valet, Keel, Randall's.
The fourth one's tough.
Yeah, that
I mean,
last one is
Jerome Clark could be in consideration, even though I don't
from
like
a
agree with
history
his like.
perspective.
Yeah,
Yes,
because
absolutely.
he's the ultimate historian, in
Yeah.
my opinion, of UFOs.
I think that fifth spot is always going to be left to like the unsung heroes
Right.
of ufology. Guys like, David Webb and Ted Blocher, who were like
Hmm.
the humanoids guys that really, enjoyed writing about that element of those cases and stuff like that. Um, and Druffel, I think you could easily throw up there,
Absolutely.
because,
Yeah.
like, for someone who was a hardcore Christian who set aside her beliefs to investigate this stuff, it was, really incredible, the cases that
Yeah.
she was investigating, because they are not like of the norm. They
Hmm.
were weird for their times. I mean,
Right.
like the Dapple Gray Lane brains case is like,
Yeah.
it's one of those ones where it's just like, dude saw a brain in the middle of the road, and that brain told him to drop his buddy off. They were going to abduct him, and he did it.
Fuck, man, that is amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the stuff right there, if you ask me.
I mean, like, if you were obsessed with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like, that's Krang. It's Krang that's, like, abducting people out here. He is an interdimensional brain, so, I
Right,
mean,
right,
it
right. It
makes
checks
sense.
out.
But, yeah, so, I've listened to pronunciations of this place. It's pronounced like Machleth or something like that. I am terrible at pronouncing it, but it's spelled Machynnelleth. So it's a place in Wales.
I'm not even gonna try it. I'm not even gonna try.
It's so the sighting takes place in the Cambrian Mountains. The witness in this case was a teenager named Trevor, and his family was on vacation. And as a part of it, they were kind of looking at this cabin that they wanted to stay at in these mountains while they were in Wales. So while they're looking at this cabin, Trevor decides he's going to go off and walk around, and he heads south and about 250 feet up this hill. And he glances over the ridge, and he sees this craft sitting on the ground. So from his vantage point, he's hiding behind a boulder. It's some 50 feet away from this craft. It's large. It's very typical for kind of what you see from crafts of this time period and even earlier. So we're talking about 1975. This is July of 1975. So it's a craft. It's got a circular base. On this base are these round lights that kind of go around the rim of this object. It's about 40 feet in diameter. And from the bottom of it to like the kind of top lip is about 7 or 8 feet. And there's a transparent dome on this thing, and it goes up quite a distance, meets in the middle at this light that's on top of it. And this object is giving off all these sorts of light. But Trevor says he cannot describe the colors. They're colors that he has never seen before. So, under the dome was a quote unquote big metal unit. It was described as 15 feet long, about 7 feet tall at its highest point. So this is like a control panel or something like that. And at the controls were a pair of very strange looking entities. Quote, they were described as looking like massive pieces of jelly, irregular in shape, and some 7 feet across and of a similar height. So this is like big, huge jelly.
Yeah,
here.
those are big jellies.
Yeah. The forms were a translucent whitish color, and inside of them were hundreds of white discs like English-style donuts, each possible 6 inches in diameter. The masses were constantly changing shape to a considerable degree, although from the movement of the white discs, it appeared that the center of each mass remained kind of like inactive. So there was like a central core that like just anchored everything there. There were no real shape or shapes that could be attributed to these kind of changing forms. It's literally just like a jello mold kind of like doing its thing, although it just kind of, there's a little more freedom to that jello. It's not under, the restrictions of jello, shall we say. So they appeared to be smooth from what he could see, although he didn't really get close enough to really look. But yeah, they're just kind of these jellies that just like kind of like undulated a little, it seems like. And they were all gathered around this metal unit. So there's like 2 of them gathered around this metal unit. And before long, there's this opening at the right-hand side of it from the base kind of like upwards. And it's opening 7 feet by 7 feet. And one of the beings starts floating out of this object, lowering itself down to the ground. And that's when Trevor decides to book it, because like the jelly, like the blob is coming for me.
Yeah,
I
that's
need to
fair.
get the hell out.
Probably smart.
I've seen this horror movie 1,000 times. We know what's going to happen. And he runs real fast down the hill. He does a quote unquote 4-minute mile, and he runs into his father, and he explains in a very calm voice about seeing this quote unquote jelly man. And he says, "You won't believe me. Come on." He runs back up there, and he sees the he beats his father up there. His father doesn't really know what to think, but he could tell that his son is scared of something.
Right.
And he does run back up, and he sees that the being has re-entered the craft, and that this craft is making a sound, kind of like a car revving its engine, but a little bit quieter. So the light on the object begins to flash wildly, faster and more erratically. Quote, until they were almost enveloping the whole craft, eventually blending more and more into the background until the craft was no longer visible, or apparently there, just like a chameleon blending into its background. End quote.
Whoa.
So, yeah, this boy kind of runs back to his father. Craft's gone, and he returns with them to the area. And the father does note that there's like a weird sound on the wind. It doesn't sound like the wind. It sounds like something else. He doesn't really describe what that sound is. But following this experience, Trevor would have a series of health problems. The first, while they were still on this trip, about a day or 2 later, he loses his voice. And the doctor thinks he has tonsillitis or something like that. But his brother also had throat problems, so that was a little weird. 3 weeks after the experience, Trevor lost sight in his left eye.
Whoa.
and he started to hear thumping noises in his head, which made it impossible for him to sleep. His parents took him to an eye specialist and a psychiatrist, and they determined that the effects were psychosomatic, like he was traumatized from what he had seen.
Wow.
And they would get worse. The blindness would kind of move, go from one eye to the other and kind of back and forth. And then at one point, he was completely blind for a period of time.
Jesus.
His mood changed as well. He was kind of an introverted kid, but he kind of got short-tempered, really aggressive, got really angry with people. He was having trouble with school, getting in fights. Yeah, I mean, he's a kid that has trauma. But like the eye problems that he had them 3 years later when Collins went and investigated this case. So like the reason that this case came about was because of it was like a Daily Mirror article that Jenny Randles had written about, asking people to send in their sightings and stuff. And this is one of the cases that came her way, and it was investigated by UFO and the UFO Investigators Network over in England. And Andrew Collins, he ends with an interesting observation here. Many UFO close encounters seem to be staged events, physical in reality or seemingly physical to the recipient, and some being staged for their benefit. In the case of Trevor P., it is difficult to decide whether he changed or whether he changed on the activity or whether the activity was staged. I suspect the former. Whichever it was, like whether he stumbled upon it or whether it's staged. So like he believes that he stumbled upon it.
Right.
Whichever it was, the effects resulting from the experience are sad, although possible with a considerable number of close encounter witnesses. The viewing of such a thing can be a terrifying experience, which leaves the subject in a state of shock and leads to psychosomatic effects. Mind acceptance of the phenomenon we term UFOs is something that varies with each person. Unfortunately, Trevor P. suffered badly. Perhaps mind acceptance is a principal reason why open contact has never been and will never be made.
Interesting.
Mind acceptance.
I find that fascinating. And Rob, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Wales a hot spot during this time?
Yeah, it's picked up in the 77, but
Yeah.
around that time.
I think there was
a lot of
even like
stuff.
another kind of, maybe not exactly this year, but like I think maybe it was 77, but there was like a schoolyard school kid. I mean, I think Wales had it going on, and even way before that, Wales has a long history of fairy and other kind of weird folkloric, supernatural. I mean, it's a long storied history of high strangeness in Wales.
Yeah, the Broadhaven sighting in 77.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then, there was a lot of stuff in West Wales that was happening at the time in 77. It's just a lot of weird stuff happening around that time. I mean, 70s was chock full of it. And
Yeah, 70s was the best.
And that is like, I don't know what it is about like Wales, but their UFOs are fucking weird, man.
Yeah,
Their aliens
they are
weird.
Cornwall, the same thing. It's like it's just weird, and it's such a long ass history of weird shit too.
Yeah, it's a long ass history of bullshit, folks. That's what this is. It's a long ass history of bullshit. That's going to be the title of my book. A long ass history of bullshit.
Oh my god, I love it.
Yeah.
Well, another interesting kind of thing. We probably touched upon this earlier, but it does seem like a lot of these UFO encounters was like showing off technology. You almost never, even like with these modern cases that like Lon Strickler will put out there. which are not researched or anything. They're just stories. You know, obviously take
Right,
it
yeah,
with a
it's
grain of
just-
salt, folks. But
It's stuff that he gets. He kind of talks to the witness and like he puts out what's out there.
like a paragraph about it, which I'm always like, can you at least write a couple pages about this?
Yeah, could you like maybe put in a little bit of time with this? And that's not to say that Lon isn't a good researcher out there, but
No,
it's
he
just
needs
like
help though.
I need like dude, I need more information.
I need
Somebody
more,
help
too.
that man. Somebody help that man. He needs help.
We'll volunteer as his ghostwriters, you know.
Yeah.
But it is interesting because it almost seems like displaying high-tech stuff was part of the theater of UFOs in the 60s and 70s. Because that really just goes out of fashion, you know, at a certain point, probably like somewhere in the 80s, where like, I mean, you fucking never hear about that anymore. Ever, ever, ever.
Right. The tech is always interesting because it's like, it's futuristic, but it doesn't seem like that far out of the realm of reality that it isn't achievable in some way. Like, man, we've got big screen TVs that are like probably shit that people saw in UFOs now, you know,
absolutely,
like flat screens and stuff.
Well, you and I talking across the country right now. I mean, that's
exactly
wild shit, dude.
Exactly. Like, you know, and the only channel that those aliens ever get is just like Earth. Here's Earth.
Yeah.
Here's the channel. Like,
boy, it's violent. It's violent.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, oh man, roll up the fucking windows. We need to get the fuck out of here.
These people are wackadoos.
Yo, they're the fucking worst, man. Whoever sent us on this fucking assignment is gonna get an earful because
we are gonna need overtime for this.
yeah, no, I'm gonna be shitting in his cornflakes in the morning or some shit.
That's a great case, though. I love the jelly, kind of the morphing jelly. Like, I can't quite decide what it wants to appear like. You know, it's almost like it caught these beings in mid transmogrification, where like they hadn't
like,
fully formed. Like, whoa, you're supposed to wait. We hadn't.
We haven't done that yet. We're working on it. We're trying to work. Yeah, if you're like into that co-creation shit, it's like, dude, make up your mind. Choose a form. Choose a form.
I mean, it's so great. It's so great. Do you have one more? We have. I think we have time for one more.
Yeah, I'm gonna like, man, I got some beef with John Keel over this one, so we're gonna talk about this.
Okay, that's fine.
We're gonna talk about the Stumps case, all right? Because the Stumps case, all right. The selling point is that some people saw some things that look like stumps, and yet it's
like tree stumps.
Yeah, and it is the least fucking research part of this goddamn story, and nobody ever tells it right. So shout out to Cole Harold because we both had kind of put in a little time on this case. I think he put in a little more time than I did clipping stuff, but a few years ago, you know, I was intrigued by the Stumps case, and before the Oregon Daily Journal put their stuff on newspapers.com, I actually reached out to the library that had archived their stuff because it was mentioned in a resource that I can't remember. But like, if you go to, I did manage to find it in the Humcat. It's under the wrong date, and I also did find it in Albert Rosales' stuff under a different date. They both have different dates for it occurring. Right. Most people just went with what John Keel wrote about it, and that was it. Nobody followed up. Nobody tried to get any more information. And yet, the newspaper articles that were written about this damn case has so much fucking detail to it.
Really? So you're finding articles on newspapers.com about this?
Yes. Yeah.
Holy shit.
Cole Harold did a lot of clipping on this.
What would you recommend keyword searching for that, to find that?
If you kind of look up Kathy Reeves, and you limit yourself to like 1966 to 1969, you'll find the information on there. It's on there. And if you specify Oregon in like the category for place, you'll find it. You'll find the clippings that, you know, we've done. But so So 65, 67 is, I've talked about it being this kind of like melting point for all sorts of weird shit, like humanoids coming out the ass. This is a time period where acceptance around UFO organizations and publications talking about humanoids more, it became more acceptable. Part of the reason for that is Gordon Creighton's publication of the Humanoids, which is this special edition Flying Saucer Review that came out in like mid 1966, and it details like humanoid encounter after humanoid encounter after humanoid encounter. It's basically like a history of humanoid encounters up until 1966. So most of the stories in there are short, but you can find used copies because it was released in a book form with certain stories that were expanded upon. In particular, there's a case called the Villa Santina case from 1947, which is kind of one of those pivotal cases. It involved an Italian painter named Luigi Rapuzzi Johannes, and he was what you would call a futurist. So his art was back in the 1920s. What he was making was kind of like futuristic kind of art, science fiction-y stuff. And he was also publishing science fiction stories in certain journals and stuff. But in 1947, he claimed that he had a UFO encounter involving these two humanoids, which are kind of like the origin of the Little Green Men story. These were little men wearing blue coveralls. They had green skin, freaky looking eyes. Like, kind of like their eyes always reminded me of like the bottom of like a beer mug, just like cut out and pasted on somebody's face. It's funny the way some people depict that case. Like they almost make them look like frogs, but they didn't look like frogs. They just had green skin and weird looking eyes, and they paralyzed them. And they took, I don't remember, like the old legend was that they took his easel because he was painting, but the truth was he was an amateur archaeologist or geologist, and he liked to go like pick rocks and stuff. And they ended up like looking through his like equipment, and I think they took rocks or something like that. But anyway, that publication was hugely important for this more acceptance of humanoids. And I'm not going to say that it was just that publication, but it did help. I also think the Betty and Barney Hill abduction becoming popular around this time has also led to his acceptance. But
right.
So yeah, 66, a lot of weird shit's happening. Even before Mothman appears in West Virginia, Oregon, there's particularly these coastal towns in Oregon, in Lincoln County, become this UFO hotspot. So the place that we're talking about in particular is Toledo, Oregon, and it's right on the Yaquina River. There's mountains, there's hills, there's a river. It's not far from the coast. And even now, like, it has that kind of charm that it used to have as a mill town, and it's kind of been preserved a little bit. It kind of gets by a little bit on its fishing and tourism and stuff. It's a place I'd actually like. I wouldn't mind visiting.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah. So, this story, it takes place on a place called Pioneer Mountain, and in particular at the home and around the home of Douglas and Evelyn Reeves. And this is like a pretty secluded spot. Their property had an orchard on it in particular, and something around 35 to 40 people in 1966 claimed to see UFOs in and around their property. So, according to an article in the Greater Oregon, quote, this strange phenomenon ranged from spaceship-like crafts, pulsating donut-shaped lights, again, donut-shaped things,
Mm-hmm.
and that crawled along the walls of the house, to strange stump-like creatures. So
Okay.
it begins with the Reeves' daughter, Kathy. She was 16 at the time. And in early March, Kathy and a girlfriend of hers were walking through the woods near their property, when out of the corner of their eye, they see what they think is a fire burning in a field. And what's interesting is that where this light is that it ultimately comes to be is in a section where the trees have been cleared away. They've been cut away.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting when we get into the other stuff happening here. But they just see this object that's like hovering above the ground. It's dome shaped, and it has like this. They call it a ruddy glow about it. It's kind of like this eerie, kind of muted glow to it. But there's sparks and smoke flying off of this thing, and it seemed to be on fire itself. So these two girls, freaking terrified, they go running through the woods. They're going to their home to grab their parents. And as they're running through the woods, they're confronted by this large red light that kind of looked like a beacon in the dark. They assumed it was somebody playing a joke on them. So they started throwing rocks at it. And in response, there are 4 other lights that just like turn on, and they start like surrounding them. So they just pluck the courage and run the rest of the way home. And they burst through the door of Kathy's house, and they start, explaining to her mother, Evelyn, what it is they saw. And she thought it was a joke. She didn't take it seriously. But she did notice that the girls were terrified.
Right.
But again, you try to put like most of that shit out of your mind. They discuss things with Kathy's father, Douglas, and they decide we're not going to talk about it. Look, it was just a thing. Don't worry about it. Like, it's not worth the ridicule and stuff. But the stuff wouldn't go away. So at around midnight, Evelyn awoke to the sound of a strange hum permeating throughout the house, and her eyes were immediately drawn to this pulsating light that was peeking through a partially open window. Throwing back the curtains entirely, this bedroom just is filled with this harsh red glow, emanating from this large object that's parked in her yard. So the entire house fills with this light, and these strange donut-shaped lights start to crawl across the walls and the ceilings, and like everybody's awake in this house now. This hum, it grows louder and louder, becoming more and more high pitched, and these crawling lights just increase in number. They're multiplying in many ways. So Doug Reeves goes for his rifle, and he grabs it from the living room, and he goes to a nearby window where he could see what he says, quote unquote, someone or something moving outside. And when he takes aim, whatever it was slowly starts to back away from the window, and the lights grow brighter. They were so frightened that they just thought that they were going to be consumed by these lights. And then they dimmed and they disappeared entirely. So everything goes back to normal. They go back to bed. I don't really get much sleep that night. You just wait for the daylight to come. But in the weeks that follow, this phenomenon keeps coming back. This family was plagued by rosy red lights showing up in the middle of the night, kind of waking them up. It was so intense most of the time that you could read a newspaper by it, is what they said.
Wow.
And it occurred so frequently that they were forced to board up their own windows just so they could try and get some sleep. But it didn't stop these crawling lights from appearing inside the house. Like, nobody knows where they came from. They just kind of appeared, and you'd see them going up and down the walls.
Weird.
In particular, the living room seemed to be one area that it targeted. On one particular evening, Evelyn Reeves was laying down. She looked toward the darkened living room through the open bedroom door and saw this transparent red glowing cloud just floating in the middle of their house.
Oh my God.
She described it as being the size of a watermelon, and it just hovered there for several minutes before it just dissipated.
Jeez.
The stumps of it all, that the way in which it was written by Keel kind of conflates two different incidents as one. So the first incident involving Kathy and her friend kind of gets like clumped into this like stumps narrative. And at some point, although I don't think it was on that first day, according to Kathy, quote, she witnessed 3 little stumps that walked across the pasture. Not only did they move, but they also were of different colors: orange, light blue, white, yellow, and watermelon colored. So she sees these weird ass stumps just running across like the family's property over at
Like the stumps have like legs, and they have do they have a humanoid? So they're kind of humanoid-ish,
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
like they're what it would see. It's like she's describing them as like, moving as anybody would.
That is horrifying. I mean, horrifying.
What's interesting is like she's not the only one that sees them. There's like 5 or 6 other witnesses that claim to see these stumps move on or near their property. So, the Reeves kind of at the end of their rope. So they called in friends for help. Like, what the hell are they going to do? But one such person was a guy named Delbert Mapes, who he would eventually buy the home from the family. They would sell it once the stuff got to be too much. He was a witness to this phenomenon. There was also a friend of the family named Max W. Taylor. He was a chemist employed by the Georgia Pacific Corporation. And on the night of March 30th, 1966, Taylor, Mapes, and a bunch of neighbors decide they're going to camp out on their lawn and try and find an explanation for what the heck is going on there. Taylor was a skeptic, but he was convinced pretty early on. So within a half hour of arriving, their bluish pulsating lights would kind of appear on and in the house, these donut-shaped lights. And what's interesting is there was one spot that appeared outside the wall of the living room, while another appeared on the outside wall of the kitchen, which were on opposite sides. And he stated, quote, almost as if a beam of light had penetrated the house and was showing at each extreme. So, like, they can't see that light on the inside, but on the outside, it's like, hey, there's these 2 lights, and they're, like, perfectly opposite each other. There was this high-speed sound, which, like, they both, like, Taylor compared it to a high-speed saw. When they call in the sheriff, the local sheriff, a guy named Thomas Price, and he shows up and he hears the sound. He describes it as like a spinning top. He arrives shortly before 1:30 a.m. and the moment he stepped out of his squad car, he glances up and he sees this fast-moving object, larger than any star, and it's moving from northeast to southeast. Quote, I just happened to look up and I saw this orange object I couldn't identify. I mean, it wasn't a plane or a meteor or anything like that. It was maneuvering. We didn't know what it was. 90 seconds later, a high-pitched whine followed, like a giant spinning top.
Whoa.
So he notes this in his police log. He talks about how he'd never believed in UFOs, but he has to report what he's seen. So he reports it as that. And, like, there is a bunch of just UFO activity that these people experience. There's Teenager Douglas Whitlow, who is driving on the Silitz-Toledo highway, and he gets chased by a UFO for like over an hour. There's another bunch of kids on one road. They see a UFO that was as big as a house, and it also kind of followed their car for a little while. But there's also some stranger things here. There was a logger named Ed Keenan, and he finds this giant chunk of metal along this path by a small creek bed. And some scientists analyze it. They actually get a bomb squad out there to take care of it because they don't know what it is.
Really?
Yeah. And they find that it's 100% pure sodium, or at least like it's largely composed of sodium. And that if it was exposed to water, it would have become highly explosive. Don't know where that came from.
The hell?
Yeah. And there was also a large quantity of aluminum shavings found around the Reeves home, which it's radar chaff, basically.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah.
Like, you know, if you're trying to throw radar off, you throw chaff down, and it kind of like confuses the signal. But for about like the good part of a year, this area of Oregon is just bombarded by UFOs and weird shit.
And that was Lincoln County, Oregon, right?
Yep.
That is, you know, when you said Stump's case, I remember like reading about it in a Keel book, but I couldn't like place like all these details. That is fascinating. I mean, that's like a major flap hotspot, whatever you want to call it. But like, it's kind of crazy. This is not known about more.
Mm-hmm. There's like, I kind of fault Keel for not going further with it. Like he was going off in his own direction anyway. Like I get it with, you know, like the Eighth Tower and stuff. Like that was kind of his focus, but like there was so much more to that, which he kind of touched on a little bit here and there. But for the most part, I think he ignored most of it. But the thing is he also reported on it. Like he reported on it in Flying Saucer Review. They don't talk at all really about the Presque Isle Park stuff in the Mothman prophecies that was happening around that time. The like large Bigfoot type creatures that were just seen in Pennsylvania. He didn't talk about like you could write a history of that time period and it would be a chunky freaking book because it's just like a lot of stuff that kind of gets passed over, but it like that tapestry is kind of important. It's just bonkers all going off in different directions, but being, you know, important enough there that I think it should have I think he could have gone a little further with it, just and still have been able to fold it into whatever he was trying to get at. Because I think, you know, with Keel, he was trying to make the Mothman the center of it, and I don't think there was a center of it. I think it was just all weirdness all over the place.
Yeah,
and
I think it's funny when you read the Mothman prophecies, which, you know, I've read a handful of times. The Mothman quickly becomes the least interesting part of that book.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, of course. It's a cryptid. It's flying. It's cool.
I mean,
but
the Mothman disappears like right before 1967.
Yeah.
So, and like it reemerges right before the Silver Bridge collapses.
Right. Exactly.
So like, you know,
it's all the other stuff that was happening at a time period in Point Pleasant in the surrounding area. To me, that is the real juice of that book.
Exactly. You know, poltergeist phenomenon, UFOs, weird men in black, weird figures showing up. Like, it's all a rich tapestry, and I think he got some of it. Like, the Christensen family that had that encounter with Tiny, that really big Men in Black insurance guy. Like, that was in New Jersey. That wasn't in West Virginia.
Right.
So,
it's kind of funny. It's like in you know, in terms of like taking a pop culture view of the Mothman prophecies, the two things like nowadays, obviously, that have been extracted, probably because of the popularity of Hellier, is Indrid Cold, which is funny because like of all the stories in the Mothman prophecies, that was the one Keel
Didn't
there's like a
believe. He didn't
he
believe
didn't
it at
believe
all.
it. He's
No.
like, maybe he had an experience, but everything that happened afterwards, I know. He's like, I know for a fact it's total bullshit.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing there's like from like 1988, there's this like really like poorly videotaped audio of Keel speaking at 40 Fest in New York City, and he's basically like, he's like, I stand by all the stories. And he was almost saying, like, I regret reporting the Indrid Cold thing because I don't think Woody Derenberger was telling the truth.
But the thing is like, how do you not? But it's like, well, he didn't believe him. He still had other cases that he connected to it. So
Yeah.
it's like, either you do or you don't. Like,
Right.
what the hell are you doing? Like,
Right. Well, I think he thought like maybe he had that initial experience on the road, but everything after that he thought was fiction.
I mean, it's a lot because like it's straight up contactee stuff.
Yeah.
And like you also gotta think like at this time, even in the 60s, contactees not really well thought of, not really written about as much as they had been. Adamski had died in 65, I think. On the same day that the Skeleton mystery, supposedly occurs, and like there's mentions of Adamski or whatever, and he is like one of the weirder elements of this all, and like because like there are always those people who's like, well, I think something did happen to him, and it's like, yeah, okay, well, the photos are bad, but
well, one interesting aspect of the Woodrow Derenberger. Sorry, I don't know how we tangentialized into this, but one interesting thing, and I think so. Do you know who Tanner Boyle is?
Yeah.
He wrote an amazing piece, like kind of a 4-part series on the whole Mothman era stuff, and he points out a lot of good kind of parapolitical things were running along the side, like the big strike at Union Carbide, which was the biggest. It's truly interesting. But I think he was able to confirm, and I don't want to misquote him, but that there was always that rumor that Woodrow Derenberger was invited to NASA,
right,
to like meet with some scientist, and I think that might have actually happened.
Right. Yeah.
Like I think people have actually been able to confirm, like, yeah, he actually did visit NASA.
Yeah. I mean, Eric von Daniken visited NASA.
Yeah. Good point.
Like,
I mean,
like, it's something I'm sure NASA hosted a bunch of cranks. I wouldn't be surprised if they brought in a bunch of different people.
Right.
Just because, like, they have an affiliation with the government, so like, it makes sense. Like, I wonder what NASA would be if they had just like formed it into a branch of the military. Like, it would have gotten probably way more funding.
It would have got more funding, and a lot more people probably would have been fucked with. Yeah, well, I mean, like, I always think about like poor Gordon Cooper, the astronaut, one of the first astronauts, like a very famous astronaut, heralded, loved by America. And he was totally duped by that woman, Valerie Ransone, who was probably a CIA agent.
Yeah, probably.
What's actually weird? I actually found her. She's alive.
Oh shit.
Yeah, she lives in Hawaii, and she saved like a person drowning. Like, she is still alive. She's like one of those interesting shady characters who I become fascinated by a lot of the sociological aspect of the stuff. And Valerie Ransone, folks, it's like she's kind of a deep cut, but like Valet wrote about her in a couple books, and she said it was like this beautiful woman who like invited Valet to her like fancy offices. No, the offices were not furnished. It was really sketchy. But then she had kind of like almost like brainwashed Gordon Cooper.
Yeah.
To believe that he had these like UFO. I mean, like she took advantage of an old man.
Yeah,
but
basically.
But it's some really crazy shit, man. Like.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you've seen him on like I know he's been on like Ancient Aliens and stuff like that. Like, they had Gordon Cooper on those programs, and it's like, Yeah. I mean, like, that also makes you think like Edgar Mitchell and what he's done.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate all the work that he has done.
Yeah, he seemed like a good dude,
Yeah.
but like,
but it's like it does make you wonder, like at that government level, what people were taken in by. I think
right.
about that all the time,
Yeah,
especially when you got government people coming out of the woodwork saying that we got UFOs and aliens and shit.
well,
So
I mean, like not to get too topical in the mess of UFOs, but like, I mean, I think we're kind of witnessing it happen in real time with Chris Bledsoe.
Oh yeah.
Where like, I feel sorry for this guy actually. A lot of people are like, he's a very polarizing figure, obviously, but like maybe he had these initial, like I almost believe that he believes his initial encounter.
Mhm.
But his property has been visited by NASA, multiple CIA people, and CIA people who have a history of fucking with people.
Right. Yeah.
and you wonder, it's like, man, has this guy been MK Ultra or something? Like,
right. Yeah. It just kind of, I don't know, man. It's just when the stuff gets weirder and harder to explain, and it seems to be happening all the time. It's like, okay, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do with that. And I'm somebody who has like a fair amount of sightings of things in my life, and I'm like, I'm a fucking crazy person. You can tell me, that's fine. Totally fine. I know what I'm doing here.
You're my kind of crazy, Rob.
Right. I know what I'm doing here, but like, when like there's just like multiple things, it's like, man, they would really either like you or some shit. I don't know, but like, yeah, it's like today. It's, man, if it's on the news, I can't really trust it.
No,
I mean, look
if
at
it's
all
coming
this
from Tim Burchett, I can't really trust it.
right. Like all this drone stuff. Like all this drone stuff turned out to be bullshit. Like the drones that so one guy sees a drone that's on a military base.
Right.
He doesn't even want his name to be out there because he doesn't even want to be associated with it anymore. And then you've got people claiming they're seeing drones all over the place. So the drones that they're seeing are police drones trying to go find these other drones. And it's like, you've got the governor of Maryland posting like mothership takes and stuff, and it's like, what are we doing here, folks?
Well,
what are we doing here?
I did while the whole drone thing was pretty annoying, I did find it sociologically very interesting because technically, whether it was all mundane, it was a UFO flap.
Right.
For some people, for a lot of people, it was unidentified flying objects, and it was a flap. But like, it's interesting to watch how hysteria can be set off in 5 minutes now with Twitter and social media, where I think hysteria took a little while to catch on, and in pop culture, hysteria can be formed in a nanosecond nowadays.
Yeah. Also, people forgot that the same thing happened in Colorado in 2020.
And I mean, dude, I was all about that because it was Western Nebraska, on the border of Western Nebraska and Colorado. Not to mention that is where the most cattle mutilations happened in the 1970s.
Right.
Is that exact little area.
Yeah, exactly. It's not inconceivable to think that parents are testing out drones that they were given to their kids. I mean,
yeah. I mean, it's I want to go back really quick. I have a couple questions about the Stumps case. So Kathy Reeves, who was the teenage girl who, ran through the forest, saw the object, I think, originally. She, I mean, I wonder, is she still alive? Do you have any idea? Are any of these witnesses still alive? I would love to do a follow-up nowadays.
She would be in her mid to late 70s if she was. If she was still living, I would love to talk to her and yo, do you remember when you were 16 and this weird stuff was happening at your house?
Right.
I always think of that because you've had family members of witnesses reach out and talk about it. George Kowalczyk's son reached out to me one time on Facebook. Yeah.
Are you talking about the Uniontown, Pennsylvania case?
Yeah.
We have to talk off the air about this.
Yeah.
Please. I'm deep in that case. My wife. That's where my wife's from.
Yeah. There was another one. An episode I did. It was just basically me reading like a New York Times article because it was like so well written. About this guy who was an abductee. Kind of lived. He worked in like he's like he had like a white collar job and stuff like that. And it was an article about like how is somebody supposed to believe you like when you're this white collar guy and stuff like that. And his daughter reached out to me to say that he never really talked about it after that. He didn't. I don't know if he didn't appreciate the publicity or whatever, but he ended up moving and stuff. But like it's always great when family members do reach out to like say I appreciate you telling a story and stuff like that. But,
right. Well, you've ran into that a couple times. Now I can't remember the name, but towards the end of Our Strange Skies run, you had one of my favorite episodes where you interviewed the son of, what was his name again?
David Rydell. Pat McGuire was
Pat McGuire. Yeah. That is, I may link that with your permission because that is such a unbelievably wonderful episode. It's great. And I just want to say, folks, really quick, like Rob's podcast, I don't know where it is now, if you're done with it or it'll come back at some point, but like it is one of the great resources for stuff we like what we've been talking about today. Basically every episode kind of breaks down a humanoid case. Sometimes he has guests on, sometimes he would do it solo, but it is like, I remember when I heard it, it was right during COVID. I was really depressed, bored, and feeling, had a lot of cabin fever. And it was this beacon of light. I became absolutely obsessed with it. And I think shortly after I reached out to you just to like say, hey man, I think you're great. And then we kind of became buddies after that. But like, I was so blown away because the research is second to none. Like, I cannot recommend to you listeners, this would be the podcast I would say, run, do not walk. I will obviously put a link in it, but it is so valuable if you're into this stuff, and especially if you're into the weird stuff like I am. It's like there's not a lot of normal white bread cases. These are bananas, bonkers, so abstract and so surreal, which I think is what I love the most about all this stuff is give me the surreal stuff.
Yeah, like man, like I've listened to I'm not trying to knock anybody, but I've listened to so many podcasts cover the same stories over and over and over and over again. And it's like, dive into this stuff. You're going to find stuff that like is way weirder than the stuff you're even talking about now.
Right.
And like, like that's kind of what I prided myself on. And like that, that element of discovery is like such a great driving force because you'll find like 2-3 part articles about things that you've never heard of before and stuff. Like you'll find like like one of the original conceits of doing this episode was to talk about the RB-47 case. And people don't know that it's like the most important UFO case probably ever that and nobody ever talks about it. Nobody ever talks about it because it's like it's kind of boring to read about, but it is fascinating in that like it's the only UFO case in which they were able to get not only radar data, visual data, but electronic intelligence data on a UFO at the same time, corroborated between ground control plane that these people were in and stuff. It's like, and we're talking about like over an hour, like probably closer to 2 hours that this UFO was hanging with these people. So like you never know what you find until you really just dive into like the resources that are online, the resources that the Archives for the Unexplained have, which is great, like one of the greatest resource, QFOS, all issues of Flying Saucer Review are like digitally archived. All of that stuff's at your feet. Just you just kind of got to go looking for it. And like, yeah, it's not the easiest, but like, if you reach out to me, I could probably point you in the direction that you need to go. So
yeah. Well, you've been incredibly helpful to me. We know, like, if I'm obsessed with, like, documenting high strangeness in Nebraska, and you have given me a couple of resources. Like, I didn't know the humcat was a thing until you told me, and my God, have I spent hours on that?
It's so fun because it's
so
just
fun.
like some dudes wrote down a bunch of humanoids on index cards, and then they just got like scanned into a PDF, which is great.
Yeah, it is great.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no editorializing. It's like, this is what happened. This is the summary, and like,
and
make up your own mind, which I love.
Like,
yeah,
here's the source at the bottom. Like, that's the bread and butter, man. That's where I found the Kathy Reeves case stuff.
Yeah,
because
the source is amazing.
Yeah,
having a source.
Like, when you go to the fucking source, because again, I shouldn't be out here doing more work than Keel did. Like, come on, man. It wasn't even that hard, dude. Like, I'm sure I'm slandering a dead man, but
right.
But I mean, that's also Keel. Keel was trying to fit something into a narrative, and that's what he did best.
Yeah. So. And sometimes I feel like, maybe he could have, he was putting out so much material. Basically from Jeddo up until time, or until like the 90s, he was just pumping stuff out. Like, it almost would have been good if he was taking this time a little bit more and done a little more investigation in each case. But maybe that's for us to do now, is to look at these cold cases. So
yeah, I mean, Keel was like paid by the word, so like he was like writing articles like crazy. He was practically puking them out.
He was not a rich man either, so he
no.
I think this is by necessity. He had to get these stories out.
This isn't like, for some people it is a rich man's game, but for most it is a poor man's game.
Yeah, especially if you have any ethics at all.
If you have ethics, if you want to waste money on like out of print books that are hard to find, stuff like that, it's not a glorious life. There are probably people who lead more noble lives, like doctors, surgeons, firefighters, those kind of professions. Nurses, they lead like more important lives. But if you really want to go penniless, looking into something, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it is fun. It's not a bad way to live life. I'll tell you. We have our fun.
Oh yeah,
Rob.
I mean, if it wasn't, oh God.
Oh my God, leaning into the weird might be more important than ever, folks.
Yeah, for sure.
Rob, this has been absolutely such a treat for me. You are one of my favorite people to talk to in general, but especially about these weird topics. Can you let the listeners know where they can find more of you, my friend?
Sure. So I am on, let's see, Blue Sky, Instagram at your UFO guy, spelled YER UFO guy. I have a Substack where I publish short stories, but also like short little humanoid encounters and like whatever weird stuff that I have. It's Foolology, so FOOLOLOGY.substack.com. You can find that there. We are working on Welcome UFO People Volume 2.
Hell yes. I love, by the way, that is so beautiful. You were so kind to let me write a forward to it. I love that zine. It's what a great comic. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Like the zine is out there. Welcome UFO People. You can follow us Instagram and Twitter. We are on there, and we still have books for sale. You can find links for those and on those social media sites. But we've been kind of slow going because we're changing up the way that we're doing things, and we're going with a fictional story, so we're adapting it a little differently than we used to with the first volume of it. So volume 1 is all our interpretations of sightings that have taken place and encounters and stuff, and 2 is going to be a fun little story about an alien named Gumbus. So
Oh, I love it.
there's going to be teasers that are going to be coming out soon. You'll meet some of the characters, and then hopefully by the summer we will start releasing some of that onto a couple of different platforms. We're thinking about also doing a Substack. So
Cool.
when that happens, we'll announce that. Follow us on social media to stay updated about that. The story. I'm on vacation right now, so one of my objectives is to finish the story, because then we're gonna hop on a Zoom call together and start adapting it. So it's gonna be fun.
Beautiful. That's exciting. Well, I love Welcome UFO People. I think it's absolutely fantastic. It belongs on everyone's bookshelf. Rob, you are the shit, dude.
I appreciate you, dude. Thank you for allowing me to ramble.
Oh my God.
like a madman.
This is what I love. Will you please come back again and give us some more humanoid stories?
Hell yeah. I've got plenty. I've got gigabytes worth, man. There's so much going on my
We could
computer.
record an episode once a week for the rest of our lives and not even come close to getting through it.
No.
But that's exciting to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Buddy, you're the best. I think the world of you. I'm so happy you're out there doing what you do. I so deeply appreciate it, and I know all your fans do too. Folks, listen to Our Strange Skies. It is truly one of the best resources for the strange and unusual and like the real deep weird, which is what I love so much. Rob, you're the shit. We're going to have you back on for more humanoid fun. Everyone, thank you so much for listening to another episode of High Strangeness. By the way, I want to say one thing. You said there's an alien named Gumbus. Gumbus is actually a Spanish pasta dish with shrimp and garlic. Quite
Hot
delicious.
damn, man.
Yeah.
Hot damn. Hot damn.
Yeah, how about that? No, you know, Rob and I text recipes back and forth to each other. We're big.
All the time.
We
All
love
the
cooking.
time.
We love
Yeah.
cooking. Okay, so folks, please enjoy your dinner. Make it a good one. Have a great day, and don't let the world get you down. Stay weird, folks. Peace.